Up everybody, so I am back from a little bit of a hiatus. Not really like a planned out or thought out hiatus or nothing like that, but just because school had just started, and so I was taking a little bit of time just to get acclimated into the new semester. But I did want to come today and actually do a video and a review on Suicide Squad, the new Suicide Squad movie that just came out, that was written and also directed by James Gunn. But I do want to get into some good things about this movie before I dive into the bad, because unfortunately for me, there is a lot of bad. The good about this movie, I really love the themes of this movie that James Gunn is going in, and the direction that he's taking it in terms of like superhero movies. You know, typically we see with superhero movies, there's very like a sense of like I'm pro-America, American exceptionalism, pro-military, pro-government. I mean, this is like the common themes in a lot of these, like not only just superhero movies, but also action films as well. It just sort of paints this very propagandic picture of America as a country, as an institution, as a governing force, not only domestically, but foreign as well. And James Gunn is like, nah, like, let's actually tell a little bit of truth here about what, you know, American intervention looks like, because it looks like exactly what's going on with Afghanistan, the fallout of Afghanistan that's going on right now. I think that this movie is actually kind of timely in terms of like, we meet our heroes, are not heroes, are villains, and they are of course instructed by Amanda Waller, or more like coerced by Amanda Waller, to go and intervene in this sort of South American country, or is it like Central American country, island, maybe in the Caribbean or something like that. It's like Colta Maltese or something like that, and they are asked to go retrieve some information because there has been a regime change in that country. And before shit hits the fan, they want to retrieve this information so that they are not implicated in anything. So like I really enjoyed, because in some superhero movies, even if they do somewhat critique the American government, the military, this idea of American exceptionalism, even if they do critique it, it's usually always like, we learn from our mistakes, we're gonna be better now, type of thing. It still puts America on this like pedestal. And also those moments feel like asides. They don't really feel like they are part of the main tension of the stories in those other superhero movies. And in this movie, it feels like, no, America being bad and doing bad things around the world and intervening politically in other people's like government and country and politics, that is not good. And that is like the main source of the tension for this movie. And I really enjoy that is the main source of tension for this movie. I also, of course, always enjoy Amanda Waller, played by Viola Davis, and as well as Margot Robbie, played as Harley Quinn. I always enjoy their characters. I don't think that there's anybody else that could have played these characters. I think the ferocity and the ferocity that Viola Davis plays Amanda Waller with is just so compelling, and you can feel it on screen. And also just the very whimsical, lackadaisical, but also very dangerous and mysterious way that Margot Robbie plays. She's able to juggle her emotions and capture that all in one. I think that is really special. I think that both of them do a really great job, even though I feel like in this particular movie, their parts were kind of downsized. I really felt that way. Like, I felt like they had much more screen time in the David Ayer version of the Suicide Squad. I mean, of course it was to make more room for the other characters, to get to know the other characters. Specifically, I think Idris Elba's character, Bloodshot, and also John Cena's character, which is named Peacemaker or something like that. Even though I didn't find those characters to be very that compelling, I didn't find the male characters, and I'm not trying to cap for like, you know, the women, nothing like that. I'm just saying, like, they just didn't feel, Idris Elba's character just didn't feel that compelling to me, and John Cena's character felt even less compelling to me. I would have loved to see more of Viola and Margot Robbie, and also Colonel Flagg as well, because I also think that he did a great job in this, even though he had kind of like a Well, he still, I mean, his part was, I think he did have more of a part in this movie, actually, because he felt like more of an aside character in the last movie. Biggest issue that I had with this movie is, and it's going to sound weird, but it is the lack of care for human life. I know that's a weird thing to say, especially in a supervillain movie, where, of course, the villains probably don't give a fuck about, you know, killing people and human life. But it's not so much that the villains felt, you know, like they were disconnected from other human beings and they lacked a sense of empathy or sympathy. It felt like James Gunn, the director, the way that it was shot, the way that the entire movie was shot, like he lacked a sense of empathy and sympathy for human life. Beginning with the very first scenes. I mean, the very first scene is this very weird group of a team put together of supervillains, and they are asked to go to the Coto. It's like I think I'm saying it wrong, but it's like the Coto Maltese or something like that, whatever country it is. And they are sort of going up on the beach. They're going to be dropped off in the middle of the ocean. And they have to swim towards shore, towards the beach, where they are met with heavy, like, gunfire from the current regime that is taking over of the country. And I don't know if anybody else got this from the scene, but I didn't realize it at first. The scene, I felt like it was like I was like, this scene feels very familiar to me. And then it was like a day later, and then I realized, after thinking about it for a minute, I realized that it was the Saving Private Ryan scene. You know, when they are storming the beach. If you've seen that movie, Saving Private Ryan, with Tom Hanks, and also directed by Steven Spielberg. Also, Vin Diesel was in it as well. They are storming the beaches of Normandy, and they are met with all of this heavy, you know, this is based off historical accuracy. And they are met with like heavy gunfire because the Nazis are on top, as they have to go up on the beaches of Normandy. The Nazis are up in these bunkers on top, just shooting away at them and slaughtering countless soldiers. But that was like the plan. That was like the strategic plan. Like, we're just going to throw all of our own armed forces. We're going to throw all of our military men at this beach, even though we know that a lot of them are going to get slaughtered, to try and take over and try to push the Nazis back. That was the strategic plan. And I think the one thing that Steven Spielberg's movie in that moment, what he tries to capture, is how even though this was the sort of like plan that was like glorified, like that V-Day, like the storming the beaches of Normandy has sort of become like this glorified moment. And what he wanted to show in that movie was the actual brutalization and like the violence of that thing. Like, lots of men willingly, I guess you could say bravely as well and courageously, gave up their lives running up this beach, knowing that most of them were going to, at least the ones in the front, were going to die. I mean, that's not funny, but the ones in the front were going to die and did die. And there's a specific scene in the movie that really always stuck out. I've seen that movie 3 times. There's a specific scene in the movie, in Saving Private Ryan, where in that moment, in that scene, a man is carrying his arm. Like, his arm has been blown off. It's after the aftermath. They've taken over the bunkers. They managed to like run up on the beach and take over the bunkers and kill the Nazis or whatever, or at least make them surrender and tie them up and stuff like that. And I think Tom Hanks is looking around at all the aftermath of it. The man is walking around with a missing arm because it's been blown off, and he's carrying it, or he goes and finds it and picks it up and starts carrying it, and he's clearly in shock. And I think Steven Spielberg wanted to show the brutalization of this moment and to de-glorify that day and also that moment that is sort of considered this like very like tactical strategic move. And in this movie of Suicide Squad, James Gunn does the same sort of move. Like, not the same move, but he sort of mimics that scene, with these supervillains running up onto the beach and essentially being met with heavy gunfire from the top, directly at them, but they didn't realize, they didn't go into the situation knowing that they were going to possibly die. And so they are kind of in shock. I don't know if anybody remembers Earl. He will always forever be Earl to me. He will always forever be Earl to me from The Walking Dead. But Earl, he sees everybody go out, as they're swimming towards the beach, because he's one of the last ones to get up to the beach. And he sees them all getting slaughtered, and he has this sense of, just fear. And he runs away, and he, dives back in the ocean to run away. And, of course, Amanda has put the chips in the exploding chips devices in their heads. And so she's yelling at him to like go back and to die pretty much. And, she ends up having to hit the button because he doesn't listen or pay attention. And in that moment, after she hits the button, it's sort of his death is made a joke out of, because in his blood, after his head explodes, it spells out Warner Brothers. So I just mentioned that scene where in Saving Private Ryan, the man has had his arm blown off and he's walking around carrying it. There's a supervillain in with the team that can detach his body parts, and he detaches, guess what? His arms. And that's like his superpower, and the arms float over towards the new regime men with their machine guns or whatever it is, or the AK-47s, and he starts slapping them, and it's supposed to be played for fun, as a comical relief or something like that. And then they start shooting it. They start shooting the arms. I just found it's played. The whole scene is played for laughs, and it's just not funny. It's just not. It's trying to be dark. It's trying to be this dark, humorous thing, and I just don't find it hilarious. I kind of find it kind of sad. And then it turned out that the whole thing, they were the distraction team to make way for the other team, which is led by Idris Elba, and is also, I think, was it Nawe the shark or something like that, and then that rat lady, and then the man with the polka dot man. We just had a whole bunch of people die senselessly for laughs. That just didn't sit well with me. There are also other moments like this as well. There's a moment where Idris Elba's team, Colonel Flag has gotten captured, and also Harley Quinn have gotten captured as well. And so they're going to go and try to rescue them and find them. And so they end up going into this encampment. It turns out that this encampment is full of not the regime men that they were trying to defeat. And it turns out that this encampment is full of a rebel group that is actually there to help them. But they go in without even checking or making sure who they're killing. And they just start picking off people. Idris Elba's character, Bloodshot, and also John Cena's character, Peacemaker. They start having this sort of pissing competition, whose dick is bigger competition, with who can they kill the most, or who can kill the most people. And they just start picking off these, this rebel group that is there to help them, because they didn't have the know-how to even check to see if they were on their side or not. And so they just start picking off men and women, shooting them dead. And then when they finally realize, because they get to the place where Colonel Flag is with the other rebel group leader, I forget her name, but they realize, oh crap, they're on our side. And then she realizes that they killed all of her friends who are trying to take back their country from this sort of brutal dictator and stuff like that. And so it's just and that is played for laughs too. They're trying to take their country back, and then you come in and you just kill everybody, and you're like, oops. At this point, it feels like James Gunn doesn't have any sympathy either. It feels like the director, it's one thing for the villains to not have any sympathy, in which they do show moments of sympathy and empathy throughout the movie, which is strange because they're supposed to be villains, but they do show moments of empathy throughout the movie. So they're not incapable of empathizing with people. But it feels like the director is almost incapable of empathizing with people. There's another moment that troubled me as well with their driver Milton. Who can help them get around town and get around the country safely. And so Milton has been with them. Milton goes through all these different adventures with them, all these different scenarios with them, all these dangerous scenarios with them. And then we get to the sort of like the third act or so. And like, I guess Milton gets shot in like a firefight at one point. And the polka dot man says, "Oh my goodness, they just shot Milton." And then Harley Quinn and Bloodshot, Idris Elba's character, they just start talking about who's Milton? Who's Milton? And it's just like, this is not funny. To go on to the execution of this whole entire film project, I guess you want to call it that, it was very sloppy to me. The whole execution was very sloppy to me. James Gunn in this movie, for some reason, is in love with like signposting everything, even when we clearly know what's going on. Like, I understood certain signposts when he was messing with the time. But then there are certain signposts where he was like, they're like, "We gotta go save Harley Quinn." And then it's like, Harley Quinn comes across the screen. It's like, what was the purpose? What was the purpose of that? You just told us that literally in the script. Why do you need to then do this? And it's not just the fact that he did this one time. He did this countless numbers of time, constantly signposting from one thing to the next when he already stated it in the text, in the script. It's all, you already wrote what's going to happen next or what they're going to go do next in the script. Or you've already alluded to it. I don't need a signpost every time to tell me what's going on. The first act, up until like midway into the second act, was very messy. It was very messy, very sloppily written. I did not, the pacing was way off. I mean, there is no pacing. I mean, we just jumped straight into the first act. We jumped straight into the first act with no introduction of any of the characters. I know these are villains, and I know that these are not good people, but still, it just felt like, let me throw these people here so they can just die. And it just, that first act, it just felt really gross to me. I didn't feel like James Gunn sort of found his pacing until like midway second act, and especially into the third. I feel like that's when it started to like slow down. Slow down, and like, let's actually get to know characters. Let's actually get to like have some like emotional connection to characters, create backstories with characters, you know, like like I didn't really feel like he had that incentive until about the second, like the latter half of the second act and into the third act. This wrench is thrown into the third act of Starro, the starfish, alien starfish. This was like a government project that was sort of conducted by the Coastal Maltese people regime and also America. And so America really wants these documents because they want to destroy the evidence that they were ever involved and ever had any hand in killing hundreds and thousands of people in this country. By conducting these tests on this alien, and the results of those tests were that a lot of them, you know, ended up dying. Why not set up more of that instead of throwing it in at the end as a wrench? Why not set up more of that? So in the first act, why do all of this like, I'm trying to be dark, humorous, frat boy humor stuff? I that's what it felt like to me. It felt like frat boy humor a little bit. Why do all of this frat boy humor? Why do all of this sort of like signposting? Why do all of this weird, fast pacing stuff when like you could have been setting up the backstories of characters? You could have been setting up the backstory of Starro a little bit more. Like Starro Like, it seems like he has a very interest. I mean, it seems like he has a very interesting like backstory, but we don't really get to know it because it's like we literally learn his backstory, a little bit of it, in 5 minutes before it's time to like fight him, and that's just not satisfying to me. He took these moments for them like to tell their backstory every few minutes, and it just felt odd and weird and clunky and awkward sometimes. And it's like, well, if you had spent the first 45 minutes of the movie dedicated to like character development instead of trying to rush it into the last act, you could have given us a better full rounded story, but you didn't want to do that. So now you have to like make these awkward aside moments for these characters where they monologue, which I monologues are not always good, and multiple monologues in a sequence back to back to back, they can get tiring. So in the David Ayer version, the villains all seem to make sense. Like, they all seem to have powers that are somewhat can be like, okay, I could see why you're here, why you got picked. I could see why you got picked for this team because you have a skill set that is necessary for probably what we're trying to do. In this movie, James Gunn goes in a different direction with the villains. Instead, he gets villains whose powers really seem very useless. It's like this very weird misfit group of supervillains that really doesn't feel like they belong together at all. It's this very odd team of supervillains. And I didn't like it at first. And I think it's because I didn't really know them that well. But I understood towards the end what he was trying to do. So he was trying to create like this very weird misfit group of supervillains that really are probably looked down upon. They're not even top tier villains. They're not really even top tier villains that are really even well respected like that. And they're looked down upon. I think that's also what he was trying to play on with the rats. The lady who, her power is controlling the rats. People look down upon rats. They think they're dirty. They think they're unkempt. I mean, they are. And they think they're gross. But they actually she says that she sees value in the rats. Her father taught her to see value in the underlings and the people who, maybe dwell below the surface and stuff like that. And so I was like, okay, that's a nice little message right there. James Gunn plays with a lot of imagery that I really didn't understand, in this film as well, like a lot of symbolism. So there's a constant symbol coming back of the birds. Like, we see a bird, Earl, he's throwing a ball, and he throws a ball at like this yellow bird. I think it's canary, isn't it? Is it canary? I think it's a canary, which might symbol something later on, because I know they just announced the Black Canary movie that they're going to do with Misha Green and Journey Smollett, which I am very excited for. But we see him sort of hit the canary with the ball and kill it when he's in the jail cell. We see that Harley Quinn hooks up with one of the dictators, who ends up dying. She ends up killing him and stuff like that. Spoiler. He likes birds or parakeets or something like that. After Harley Quinn kills him and his brother takes over, his brother, who never liked him anyway, sets his birds on fire. Again, another senseless killing. Then also we see some birds fly out of Harley Quinn's back, along with like rainbows and flowers, as she's shooting down some men from like the regime, the dictatorial regime. And I feel like the birds are supposed to represent a sense of, like, it's almost like this caged bird type of thing. I don't want to say the caged bird sings like Maya Angelou, but that's what it kind of feels like to me. I don't exactly know what the birds mean, but I'm going to guess that's what it's kind of doing. Like, we see the bird literally in the cage in the prison with Earl in the beginning. We see the birds in the cage, in the parakeets in the cage, confined in the cage, when his brother sets the other brothers parakeets on fire. But then we see when Harley Quinn is shooting these men, the birds are flying from the birds and the flowers are flying from her back. Almost a sense of freedom. And then we see some birds at the end, I think at the end of the movie as well. The birds are like eating, they start eating the little starfish things. So I think it's like the cage bird. I think it's a little bit of like symbolism of freedom and cageness, and like the cage bird sings type of stuff. But I don't want to. But again, like this, none of this is concrete. One thing I want to say about this movie is that is commenting on the comparisons to the David Ayer version of the original Suicide Squad. I cut David Ayer a lot of slack because Warner Brothers, like the first creators, the first directors that they got to do their movie, Zack Snyder included, they did a lot of sabotaging. Like Warner Brothers executives did a lot of sabotaging of those movies. And they did a lot of sabotaging, especially of the Suicide Squad, making David Ayer reshoot and cut up his movie that he originally made that was already finished. And then because of like the group testing, like they tested it out. Apparently whatever the group testing consensus was, it was whatever the sentiment was, it was that essentially they didn't like a lot of the abusive relationship that was being displayed between Harley Quinn and Joker. Like Jared Leto's Joker was supposed to play a major role and be a major part of the plot in Suicide Squad. And they had David Ayer cut all of those scenes out, which made him reshape his whole entire plot, which at the end, there was really no real significant plot in the movie. I still found the movie enjoyable. I know people like to rag on this movie, David Ayer's movie a lot, but for a movie that was cut up and that the executives made him cut up, reshoot, and do all this stuff at the last minute too, I feel like it was still a decent movie. Like I feel like it was still a very fun movie to watch. And so when people like unfairly talk about it, I get upset because it's just like, how are y'all gonna judge him based off of a movie that really wasn't his artistic vision? It's so funny because, they were like, we don't like the violence that's going on that you put in Suicide Squad. That's what they told David Ayer, right? But then like you allow now in 2021, you're allowing James Gunn to do all this violent, gross shit in this movie. So like you cut up this man's movie and criticized it because of the violence, but only to allow the next director that you brought in to do the violence that you said that he couldn't do. But it's also funny because a lot of people said that this is the best DC movie that they've ever made, which I just think is one of the craziest statements I've ever heard in my everlasting life. Like, what? Like, Man of Steel exists. Like, people are saying that this is the best DC film ever made. And it's funny because that is not representative of the numbers at all. Like, I think they got 26 million the first opening box office week, and people were trying to make excuses for it, saying like, oh, well, that's because of COVID. And it's like, nah, bro, like, okay, you want to add COVID into the equation, that's fine. But then shouldn't that mean that the viewership that's what should take over, the viewership? So if they didn't make it up at the box office because people were afraid to go to the movie theaters, which is the excuse that a lot of people are running with, that people are not willing to go to the movie theaters, and I do believe that's somewhat true. But also at the same time, what's the viewership looking like? The viewership was looking worse when I looked it up. It was looking worse than Oscar night or Grammy night. Like, they were getting worse views. They got worse views for the movie than the Oscars do on Sunday night, or the Grammys do on Sunday night when they come on, because nobody watches that shit either. A lot of the core fans, we wanted the David Ayer cut. Like we wanted the David. I was not in a rush to see this movie because I still wanted to see the David Ayer. I want to see the David Ayer cut. Warner Brothers loves to shit on their own fans, and it's really frustrating. Like, because Marvel doesn't shit on their fans. Like, they stick to their guns, and no matter if like DC fans are gonna like it or so and so is gonna like it, they're gonna stick to their formula. No matter how annoying it is. Warner Brothers is always constantly trying to be Disney, trying to be Marvel, and it doesn't make any sense. Why do we need two Marvels? That makes no sense. Why would you want to be exactly like? That doesn't make any sense to me. That's what they were trying to do before, is be more Marvel-esque, be more like PG-13, age-appropriate jokes, ha ha ha. I think that DC has Warner Brothers has shitted on their fan base so much that I just think that we don't show a lot of us just don't show up anymore. But those are my thoughts about this movie. You guys let me know what you think about the movie. But I will see y'all next time for the next video.